If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to Mindshock True Crime. I am Bruce McGuire, and you are listening to the Amy Mihaljevic series. This is episode 3, Sighting. Was Amy Mihaljevic sighted after leaving the Bay Village Square shopping center? How legitimate is that sighting? And is there more to the phone records than has been publicly known? We'll be examining press conference footage from within 3 days of her disappearance, as well as other evidence and statements from people in the case that point to a possible verified sighting of Amy Mihaljevic after leaving the Bay Village Square shopping center. This is one of the most puzzling cases, of course, a case that has so much information and yet remains unsolved. I'll also be delving into the possibility that there were multiple abductors or multiple people involved, as we've touched upon in the previous 2 episodes. If you haven't checked those out, make sure you check those out, because we will be building on top of the information revealed in those episodes. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, you want to support the podcast, help us get out more mind-shocking true crime episodes, and keep up awareness in many of these cold cases, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You can become a patron. Check the link in the description. Patrons, of course, get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast, depending on your tier. Keep the awareness up in not just this case, but in all cold cases. Hit that like button. Share this podcast across social media platforms, of which you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. And make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell for notifications. Make sure you allow your device to have the notifications come through. If that's still not working, you can just go to youtube.com/Mindshock to manually check when the latest episodes are released, the latest lives, and also peruse our ever-growing back catalog of cases and topics in typical Mindshock fashion, with logic and reason at the forefront, exploring every avenue and every theory, unlike many other bias podcasts. Questions, comments, thoughts, theories, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. And speaking of comments on YouTube, we have a commenter here regarding the phone issues and how the phone calls were logged and why there would be no record of who called Amy or where Amy called from when she called her mother. But here's a commenter. My dad was a phone repairman at Michigan Bell and subsequent iterations after the breakup in 1980. He worked 68 to 2015, so quite a lot of decades there. Local calls were a flat rate on the phone bill. They were not logged because there was no extra cost involved. Long distance was the big moneymaker, and those were logged by distance and time of call. So here's what's interesting. In terms of payment, that makes sense. But in terms of not being able to determine where the calls came from, that doesn't quite make sense, because they have to know it's not long distance, right? Which means they do have to know where the call is coming from. And we're talking 1989 here, but I suspect even in 1960 or 1970, there must be a way of determining how the calls are routed on the switchboard. And from documentaries I've seen, supposedly the technology is quite old, so it's not upgraded for many, many decades. So when one call is connected to another call, so when one phone line is connected to another line, there must be a record of that somewhere, somehow. Now, I'm not saying this is public information, but are the FBI or law enforcement holding back information on the calls? Do they really know where it came from? And we are going to be examining that as well. First things first, let's look at the conference, the press conference. So this is a news snippet from October 30th, 1989. So 3 days after. And let's listen here.
On Friday afternoon, either in the Bay Village Shopping Mall.
Late this afternoon, Bay Village Police and the FBI held a press conference to release the latest picture of Amy.
And she's just talking over him, but he just said either from the Bay Village Square Shopping Center or another mall in the area, Amy Mihaljevic was abducted. Or another mall in the area. Let's continue here.
Taken just 3 weeks ago at school. Besides announcing they believe the abductor knows the family, they also have a better grip on what happened the afternoon Amy was apparently abducted at the Bay Village Shopping Center.
So again, early on, they are fairly convinced that the abductor knows the family. So there's only two ways it could go from there. Either they exhaust either that's what they believe early on from an impression, and then they thoroughly investigate everybody and they determine it's not someone known. I mean, again, they didn't rule anybody out or in, but is there something early on that hasn't been disclosed that make them really think that it was someone known to the family or Amy? And we don't have that information as of yet.
We also have reason to believe that Amy left with that individual from that location and went to another area where they may have gone shopping, and that would be a mall or a shopping center somewhere in the area.
Again, so we have, from the earliest information known, they have reason to believe that she left from the Bay Village Square Shopping Center and went shopping elsewhere. So how much, which again, this is problematic for a few different reasons. Because how far are you going to carry a ruse? Because every step of the way, I mean, I don't know. This is a real outlier case, no matter how you look at it. So, if you're going to take someone from a busy shopping area in front of a police station, I guess you would drive to another busy mall where you'd be spotted. I mean, I don't know. It's really bizarre. Unless the individual that led Amy to a vehicle at the Bay Village Square Shopping Center is not the same individual that was seen shopping with her elsewhere. But let's continue dissecting here.
And that would be a mall or a shopping center somewhere in the area.
The FBI says they've sent a pair of sweatpants found in the area to the FBI lab in Washington to see if they belong to Amy. And Bay Village police now believe the abductor spent time at the Bay Village Shopping Center before meeting up with Amy Friday afternoon.
So that statement is curious. Does that mean the individual was staking the area out and they were hanging out there for an hour or more prior to when Amy came there? Or does that mean there's multiple stakeouts, or just this is an area, this would obviously be a shopping center that the individual was familiar with, in which case they would know it's across the street from the police station, in which case if there's an officer in that very shopping area at the time this individual is talking to Amy and leading her away to a vehicle, I mean, the audacity, the gall, it's really mind-shocking unless there's a red herring here and we're missing something. And we'll be examining that.
Shopkeepers and employees have been racking their memories.
But we always get a whole lot of them. They all come in, about 5 after 3, and we let 3 in at a time. They got to park their bikes here. But apparently they had spotted her down there at the bowling alley.
So one of the shopkeepers is saying they spotted Amy by the bowling alley. So she's been spotted all over that shopping center by different people, which is curious. Some people believe that Amy was actually led through the back of the bowling alley. It's bizarre. It's really bizarre.
The family, who lives on this Bay Village cul-de-sac, has told police they don't recognize the composite picture of the man 2 10-year-olds say they last saw Amy talking to. An FBI artist flown in from Washington this afternoon is now working on a better picture. As interest in the search for Amy increases, so do the number of tips being phoned in. Early this afternoon, an anonymous caller told the FBI Amy had been dropped off at Euclid Square Mall in front of the Florsheim shoe store.
Whoa, major mind shock there. An anonymous caller. Okay, so does a caller being anonymous, does that increase or decrease the likelihood of legitimacy, or is it irrelevant? Because based on the caller, let's say the caller has a criminal record, they don't want to be associated with the case, whether it's petty theft or some minor drug charges, something that has nothing to do with harming children, and they would never support harming children, but they want to contribute to the case. Would they be anonymous? Is it someone who maybe was involved in this whole operation but thought that it would never take a violent turn, and when it did, they want to point the finger, or they want to anonymously try to have their fellow perpetrators caught? Is that why they did it? Who knows? But now we have a sighting at the Euclid Mall. So the Euclid Mall is not incredibly close to Bay Village. So from the Bay Village Square Shopping Center to Euclid Square Mall is roughly 27 miles. So it's northeast of Cleveland. So you have to pass Cleveland, continue going to the Euclid Square Mall in Euclid, Ohio. Now, that's interesting because people obviously would not recognize Amy Mihaljevic at the Euclid Square Mall in Euclid. I mean, you'd have people from Cleveland, people from the other surrounding area. It would be a busy area, and this would now be, you'd have to think this would be closer to the time most people are getting off of work on a Friday afternoon at Euclid Square Mall. So it might not be that unusual to see a man shopping with someone who people might think is his daughter. So, again, the issue there, though, of course, is at what point did something go wrong? You know what would be really crazy? I mean, I'm sure they would have figured this out if there was a guy named Frank who worked with the mother and he really did just want to buy a gift and he had no intention of harming Amy, and then something later happened with other individuals. And for whatever reason, he disappeared. But of course, apparently there was nobody named Frank who worked with his mother, as far as I know. I mean, people can chime in. I'll have to check with James Renner as well what the deal is with the Frank story, or if he's listening, James can chime in here in the comments. But it is bizarre because if they actually did go to another mall and actually shop for real, what does that mean? Like, how far is someone willing to carry out this ruse? And if this individual is intending to harm Amy, is it possible that he wasn't intending to harm Amy? Is it possible that this is just some complete whacked out weirdo who was not planning to harm her in any way? Is it possible it's somebody with some kind of mental deficiency who's being used by other nefarious individuals? But the likelihood of an issue coming up, the longer this is carried out, I mean, it seems very strange if this is legitimate. On the other hand, if this anonymous caller, were they mistaken? Did they just see someone who looked like Amy and they just felt like they needed to report it, but they weren't sure? But then why would it even be used in this segment? How did the news reporters find out about this? Did the police must have let them know. So why did they let them know if they didn't think it was a legitimate sighting? It's very strange. Were there other individuals who corroborated this? And did none of the more expensive areas in the mall have security video cameras? So some of the more expensive stores at the mall, what year did they start using security cameras? Now, this is something that comes up in a lot of true crime cases. So I'm actually going to read an article here. This is one of the best articles regarding CCTV and security cameras in general. It was published November 20th, 2019 by John Carlson on asecurelife.com. When did security cameras come out? Security cameras have evolved a lot since they first debuted in Stalin's Russia more than 90 years ago. Let's explore the surprisingly fascinating history of security cameras. The dawn of video surveillance, 1927 to 1949. The core technology, ideas, and ethics behind security cameras connect closely with the origin of closed-circuit television, CCTV. Security cameras as we know them didn't exist during this time. Soviet surveillance and Nazi rockets, 1927 and 1942. From the beginning, repressive surveillance states and security cameras went hand in hand. The first documented use of surveillance cameras was in Soviet Russia during the Stalin era. In 1927, a Russian scientist named Leon Theremin invented a simple wireless system that connected a video camera and a television together. So we have wireless video in 1927. Not just wired, wireless. It was eventually used to watch visitors coming to the Kremlin in Moscow. That's a hell of a birthday for security cameras. In 1942, around 15 years after the Soviets created a rudimentary CCTV system, the Nazis created one of their own. Siemens AG built the system in 1942 for the airfield at Peenemünde, Germany, to monitor the launch of V-2 rockets. The system, designed and installed by German engineer Walter Bruch, allowed people to remain a safe distance away from the launch site. The Orwellian Connection, 1949. Science fiction has always influenced technology, and security cameras appear in some of sci-fi's most infamous novels. In 1984, George Orwell described a totalitarian surveillance state where the thought police monitor the middle class through devices called telescreens. And how eerie on how those predictions came true. Telescreens are a hybrid between security cameras and TVs, not unlike modern smart TVs. Interesting enough, security cameras weren't widely used when Orwell's groundbreaking novel came out in June 1949. As you probably remember from your high school English class, 1984 makes a sharp critique of surveillance that still resonates today. This story will stay in the public conversation around privacy as long as there are security cameras. Technological limitations. It's going to get interesting here, 1950 to 1971. While our previous examples established the basic technical and ethical principles of security cameras, this technology was primarily used by governments and militaries. After 1950, CCTV technology started to spread beyond military applications into commercial use, like manufacturing, education, and medicine. Due to limitations with technology at this time, it was expensive to use CCTV for security purposes because companies had to pay someone to monitor the live video feed. Using video for the sole purpose of improving security wasn't practical for all but the largest of organizations. Using cameras to look for suspicious activity was uncommon until the late 1960s. One noticeable example is in the city of Olean, New York. The city installed video surveillance on its main business street in September 1968, specifically to fight crime, making it one of the earliest adopters of this now common technology. The security camera goes mainstream 1972 to 1989. Today, we take for granted that all security cameras can record video, but before the 1970s, there wasn't a good way to do this. Regarding security, recording security footage involved magnetic tape reels that weren't easy to work with. The advent of video cassette recorders, VCRs, in 1972 made it easier To record video, users could record over old video footage or quickly switch tapes. As a result, many types of businesses adopted security cameras during the 1970s, especially banks and stores. So, starting in the 70s, I'm sure high-end stores at malls had video surveillance. So, how many stores had video surveillance at the Euclid Square Mall in 1989, in late 1989? There's got to be at least a couple. Does law enforcement have security footage from that mall that they have not yet released, and that's how they know that that was a credible sighting and they felt comfortable telling reporters that early on? Most of this has basically disappeared in subsequent reports. But I'll finish the article here just for general information. Going digital 1990 to present day. Although the technology behind modern digital cameras was a product of the 70s, it wasn't until the late 90s that it started appearing in mainstream camera products like security cameras for the average business or home. Digital cameras have a few distinct advantages over traditional analog cameras. Digital security cameras save video to a hard drive or flash storage and delete old footage automatically. This means they can record continuously, although looking over that much security footage is still a challenge. Another 1990s innovation was the digital multiplexer, which allowed a digital video recorder, DVR, to simultaneously record video from more than one security camera. Until this time, every security camera required its own dedicated recording device. Multiplex camera setups are the dominant form of security cameras in most businesses today. It's strange to think that the technology is younger than most millennials. In contrast to the crisp HD video we have today, early digital security cameras had poor resolution and frame rates. In 1996, Axis Communications released the Axis Net-Eye 200, the first Internet Protocol camera, IP camera. IP cameras enable remote access via the internet so you can watch the video anywhere in the world. Most consumer-grade security cameras today are IP cameras. Okay, so what's the takeaway here? So whatever stores, there seem to be stores, so even in the 70s, so from 72, so the early to mid 70s, probably not that many stores. By the late 70s through the 80s, there was a considerable amount of stores that had video surveillance. So they were most likely VHS surveillance. So they have a VHS tape. Now, is there another possibility that at this Euclid shopping mall, the footage is from such a distance and so grainy that they can't determine if it was Amy with this man or someone who looked like Amy? Is it from such a distance in the mall that they can't even make out the exact colors? Is that why they can't determine for certain that it was Amy? I don't know. I'm just going over possibilities here. Obviously, law enforcement could clear it up if they want, but they've remained tight-lipped about this. Let's continue with this news clip from October 30th, 1989.
Within minutes, the mall was crawling with police. They searched inside and outside, but no Amy. Neighbors tell us they never thought anything like this could happen in Bay Village.
So they actually searched the mall. Let's go through that again.
Within minutes, the mall was crawling with police. They searched inside and outside. As interest in the search for Amy increases, so do the number of tips being phoned in. Early this afternoon, an anonymous caller told the FBI Amy had been dropped off at Euclid Square Mall.
Earlier this afternoon, so does that mean this call came in October 30th, 1989, or was this news clip recorded the day before? Either way, that's not October 27th. So either the 29th or the 30th, when this news report was aired, an anonymous caller called in. So how did they get this information about this anonymous caller for this news report earlier this afternoon? So most likely they're talking October 30th. So did that insinuate? So, okay, it's difficult to discern whether the caller was stating that Amy was dropped off there that afternoon, the 30th, or on the 27th. Either way, the police responded on the 30th and searched the entire mall. So you would have to assume that they pulled all the security tapes from any of the stores that had tapes. Unless not a single store had tapes. So is it possible that the store that had a security system, either a jewelry store or some, a higher end store that had security, if that camera was very far away from the shoe store where Amy was dropped off, is it possibly there is footage, but it's so grainy that it's just impossible to discern? I mean, it could be anybody, any girl approximately that age and size with possibly her father or whatever it looks like. And perhaps, since this was reported so early on, is it possible they actually tracked down some guy and his daughter and they verified that that was them on the tape? So then they knew for sure it wasn't Amy. And then this sighting was completely forgot about. But as far as I know, even in more recent articles, there's still references. There were reports she was spotted at the mall. So you would think at the Euclid Mall. So you would think that if it was ruled out definitively, they would not continue alluding to these sightings. So it seems like it was not ruled out, and it's still a question mark as of now.
Since Amy disappeared, these streets normally filled with children playing have been strangely quiet.
She used to come over and play with our dog all the time. I have one son.
How old is he?
8.
Are you scared for him?
Very.
What are you doing different?
Sharing this with him and being, rather than not talking about it, we are being extremely open about it.
Neighbors say it's ironic this could happen in a city written up in Family Circle magazine as the 6th safest city in the United States. Connie Deegan, Channel 3 News.
That's interesting. So apparently Bay Village was on the map. It was voted the 6th safest city in the entire country. Does that have anything to do with the strong FBI presence? Huh, interesting. And are those stats what made it attractive for witness protection relocation? A lot of unknown variables here. A lot of unknown variables. Now, we're going to get into major Mindshock territory now. So, I am going to go to James Renner's book, Amy, My Search for Her Killer, Secrets and Suspects in the Unsolved Murder of Amy Mihaljevic. And so James Renner interviewed Mark Mihaljevic, Amy's father. And there's a couple of strange comments here, but I will highlight this one. Do you still hear from the Bay Village police? They called again a few months ago. And by the way, so Mark Mihaljevic actually moved out of Bay Village, still somewhat nearby in a neighboring town. They called again a few months ago. Want to know if a name was familiar to me. It wasn't. That's typically how the calls go. So here we go. All these years later, they're still calling him to see if names sound familiar. Again, we are circling back to law enforcement for whatever reason. They seemed convinced that there was possibly more than one individual involved, and at least one of the individuals was known to the Mihaljevic family. That's typically how the calls go. I'm amazed they're still working the case. My theory is when they know who did this, before anything else, they'll come knocking on my door. Did you read Robert Ressler's book? I said, the one that named Billy Strunak as the likely suspect in the chapter on Amy. The FBI told me the book was a piece of expletive, he said. No, I didn't read it. Had you ever taken your family to Ashland County before Amy was abducted? We went to Mohican Park out there, he said, but we didn't stay in the campgrounds. We stayed at a hotel. Amy was in Brownies and the Girl Scouts, though, so I don't know if they ever camped out in that area. Now, this is really bizarre. How has that not been determined? So they didn't interview all the individuals involved with Amy's Brownie or Girl Scout troop. So they didn't narrow it down whether or not they ever went camping or anything like that in the area near where she was found. I mean, that's really bizarre that that was not ever nailed down. Okay, so continuing here, I tried to think of more questions to ask Mark while he was still in that zone of recall. There were so many open-ended questions whenever I thought about the case, but at that moment I couldn't remember them all. So I fell back on something more or less factual. Did your phone records from the day Amy went missing show something odd? I asked. Okay, it's Mindshock time. Mark seemed to think hard for a minute before nodding. If I remember right, somebody called our house from the Euclid Mall from a payphone. So specifically the Euclid Mall, specifically for the payphone. Now, he doesn't state when they called. So, okay. That's really bizarre. Is this the call that was identified? Is this the call that was identified as the call that this individual called Amy in the however many days prior to her disappearance, that week, earlier in the week? So I'm assuming it would have either been the Monday, the Tuesday, possibly the Wednesday, because there would have had to have been time for her to tell other friends and all these things. So do they know where that call came from and they just say they didn't? It doesn't make a lot of sense. What exactly is the region considered local versus non-local, where law enforcement is claiming they cannot trace the call? Now, what about the call to Margaret at her job? So Margaret Mihaljevic at the time worked in Westlake, which is not too far south of Bay Village. Now, what is considered local versus non-local? So if Euclid is considered non-local, they would have a record for that. And if that was on the record in their phone bill, why has that been hidden? And was Mark Mihaljevic told not to reveal that information, but after all the years had gone by, he decided to tell James Renner anyway, or he forgot that he wasn't supposed to reveal that information? He actually said, so let's, unless there was a misremembering there, let me go over it again. Did your phone records from the day Amy went missing show anything odd? And he said, if I remember right, someone called our house from the Euclid Mall from a payphone. So if this is the day she went missing, was she calling from the Euclid Mall? And either nobody answered or someone did answer. Is there more information that's not being shared here? If Jason picked up or her mother picked up, is there information we're missing that has not been revealed to the public because it contains whatever clues? They don't want to compromise the investigation. Is there evidence? I mean, it would be really dark if the kidnapper called from the Euclid Square Mall, but if the Euclid Square Mall is outside of local, it would be logged. They know exactly where Mark Mihaljevic is stating here that this is the day she went missing. So she called her mom, is it possible he got confused and this is the call they traced to her mother at Westlake? So was she calling her mother from Euclid? Now, Euclid is a good, 30 to 40 minute drive, possibly, from the Bay Village Square shopping center. So she calls her mother at approximately 3:30 p.m. in Westlake at the Trading Times. This is the call that we know about that's public, unless there's another call to the house at a later time. So apparently she got home at roughly 5:30. So she got the call from Amy at work at 3:30. She gets home at 5:30. Was there another call that hasn't been disclosed to the house? Which call is Mark Mihaljevic referring to? that came from Euclid. Now, he actually says that somebody, let me give the verbatim from the book here, James Renner's book. Somebody called our house from the Euclid Mall from a pay phone. How would he know that information? That means the call was traced. That means they know exactly where the call came from. Now, is he being really careful here where he was asked not to reveal that Amy called again? Or if there was some kind of ransom that we don't know about and this has all been hidden from the public for whatever reason, again, I'm not saying that's happened. I'm just thinking outside the box here because the case is still as of yet unsolved. Did her kidnapper call from the mall? Or did Amy call again from the mall? Or did Mark Mihaljevic confuse what was told to him? Because this is all these years later when James Renner is interviewing him. And he confused it, and that was the call traced that the mother that Margaret received in Westlake at the Trading Times, and that was traced. But 3:30 p.m., that means she would have had to have left the shopping center at before 3. So she was seen at the shopping center supposedly at approximately 2:15 p.m. So that does leave a bit of time because if she left the shopping center between 2:30 and 2:45ish, it would have to be closer to 2:30 because by the time they get to the mall, then they would have to get to a payphone. But if that's the first thing they did is go to the payphone before going shopping, it does line up. It is possible. It's possible with this timeline with so many unknowns. But this just continues to point to these questions on what has law enforcement not revealed that could be very helpful. Are these Euclid Mall... We have two issues here. We have at least one sighting. Supposedly there were more. We have one sighting reported to the police, reported to the news station, which mentioned this in their October 30th broadcast just 3 days after. We have constant references to more than one individual, and law enforcement really believes that this individual is known to the Mihaljevics. So I don't know what to make of it. It's quite curious. So another wrench here is the sighting at the supposed sightings at the Westgate Shopping Center, Westgate Mall. Now, the Westgate Mall is only a little less than 6 miles, 5.7 miles from the Bay Village Shopping Center, relatively on the way to the Euclid Mall. So is it possible, because it's only, 10 to 15 minutes, approximately 13 minutes drive time from Bay Village Square. Did they go to the Westgate Shopping Center and then couldn't find anything, and he convinced somehow they continued on along to Euclid? I mean, there's things that don't make sense here. I mean, first of all, who would abduct someone in front of a police station in a busy shopping center in broad daylight in the middle of the day? It's really bizarre off the get-go. Are we going to say this individual is definitely not going to make other stops at shopping centers to continue the ruse? I'm going to read an article here, Cleveland19.com. This was posted October 29th, 2019. Who killed Amy Mihaljevic? The missing pieces and a killer on the run. This week marks 30 years since the disappearance of a 10-year-old girl from Bay Village. It is a story so unique and bizarre, it has baffled investigators and an entire community for decades. Amy Mihaljevic was last seen at a shopping plaza in Bay Village with someone who has eluded capture for 30 years now. And again, here we have after the fact, years later, it's usually someone, not some people. Whereas early on, law enforcement made references to more than one individual. Okay. October 27th, 1989, Bay Village Police Chief Bill Guerrero just got home from work. He was getting ready for a murder mystery party with friends. It was a whodunit thing, and I was supposed to be the investigator because I was a police officer. I got home and I never made it to the party, said Guerrero. Little did he know, He would soon have a real-life murder mystery on his hands, one that has haunted an entire Northeast Ohio community to this day. The first call to Chief Garau came from his lieutenant. He said, "There's a girl missing. We were kind of worried right from the get-go," said Garau. 10-year-old Amy Mihaljevic hadn't come home from school. He called back a little later, said, "It doesn't look good," said Garau. Current Bay Village Police Chief Mark Spatzel was a rookie officer that evening. "I remember searching the Mihaljevic home. I remember searching the railroad tracks behind their house. I remember searching the park," said Spatzel. Earlier that very day, he had talked to Amy. "The class I spoke to that day on October 27th was actually Amy's class, and she was in that class," said Spatzel. Officer Spatzel spoke to the students about safety and about strangers. "I kind of played it back in my mind. Is there something I could have done or said that would have changed the course of history? And there's nothing." And in yet another plot twist, another inconsistency in this case, Spatzel adamantly recalls that he went to the middle school to talk to Amy's class in her classroom, whereas Amy's classmates clearly state they actually got on a bus and went to the high school, which actually is not that far, basically down the street, a couple of blocks away, and Spatzel spoke at the high school. So they were classmates of Amy's that remember going on the bus, seeing her on the bus. They went to that short trip to the high school, then they came back to the school, so that speech was at the high school. Again, who's more likely to remember correctly? I don't know. If there's multiple kids, I wonder what the teacher said about that. I mean, there's got to be a way to corroborate whether or not they went to the high school. Does that really matter? I don't know. It's just in a case with so many inconsistencies, bizarre anomalies, and twists of fate, this is just yet another one. It's just really, really bizarre. Amy is missing. Margaret was all hysterical that Amy wasn't around, and where's Amy, said Mark Mihaljevic. Amy's mother was frantic. It was now 5:30 p.m. on October 27th. Mark, Amy's dad, just got home from a work trip in Cincinnati. And how often does he do work trips? If he does work trips fairly often on Fridays, that means nothing. If this is the only work trip he ever took that year, on the day that Amy goes missing, I don't know. Perhaps there's something there too. It's really, really bizarre. My friend and I went down to the middle school and started walking towards Lake Erie, down the creek, French Creek, calling her name, flashlighting, said Mark. I remember doing that. I still had my sports coat on, never took my sports coat off that night. The investigation begins. The next morning, the FBI was there with about 50 agents, most of which actually lived in Bay Village, said Garau. The focus was Bay Square, the last place Amy was seen. It was a short walk from school. Amy told friends she was going there to meet someone. And again, if you listen to the previous episodes, we have the lieutenant saying some people, not someone. Some people, not some person, some people, plural. Weird. She got a phone call prior to this date, and the caller wanted her to go shopping, buy a present for her mother. This was the spot they arranged they would meet, explained Spatzel. Two other 10-year-olds, saw Amy with a man. They came up with a sketch of that suspect. It was the only tip investigators had at the time. The suspect walks up to Amy. Again, he knows what she looks like. Walks up to Amy. There's a brief conversation, and then the last anybody sees is them turning to the parking lot, and then nothing, said Spatzel. And let's reiterate here, nobody saw them enter a vehicle of any kind. And it's also unclear the manner or necessarily whether or not this individual even led her away. Again, we're relying on this testimony. Law enforcement has not released exact details. Every day after school, Amy would call her mom. The day she was abducted was no different. At some point, he allows her to make a phone call back to her mother, let her mother know she's okay. Chief Spatzel, does not believe Amy felt she was in danger at that point. He believes the two were probably shopping somewhere. There's a possibility they were seen at Westgate, the old Westgate Mall, explains Spatzel. There was a sighting there that matched up. Interesting. Interesting. So what does it mean there's a sighting there that matched up? And how do we rectify that with the Euclid Mall sighting, plus Mark Mihaljevic stating in an interview with James Renner that there was a phone call to the house that was traced to a Euclid Mall payphone? Is it possible that both sightings are legitimate? Is it possible that this individual, if he wanted to lure Amy farther away, let's say towards Euclid, that would be harder to do for, let's say, a 30-plus minute car ride. Now, a closer to 10, 15-minute ride is a little bit more feasible. Maybe she wouldn't become alarmed. So they're at the Westgate Shopping Center. Did he say, if we don't find anything here, we can go to the Euclid Mall because they have more stuff and fancier stores? Did something happen between the Westgate Shopping Center and the Euclid Square Mall? But then who made the call from the Euclid Square Mall? Did the kidnapper make that call? Or did Amy make the call from Euclid? If the Westgate Shopping Center lined up, if the Westgate Shopping Center did not line up, how often do law enforcement drop statements like that in some kind of a weird attempt to make it look like they're cold, that they're not on the trail? So if they know that he was in Euclid and the call was from Euclid, are they dropping the Westgate connection there just to throw people off? Or do they really believe that one was legitimate as well? Do they believe both were legitimate? And it would be interesting to know what exactly law enforcement theorized, or what the different theories are. Do they have one theory that involves this kidnapper, perpetrator, whoever, or are they not the perpetrator? As I went over before, is it possible that the person in the sketch is not the one that drove off with her? Or if he is, well, whether he is or isn't, the person who drove off with her is also not the person who harmed her. And other people harmed her, possibly more than one individual. This is what we are left to ponder, because law enforcement has not been particularly forthcoming in these details. But you have to really think there's at least one scenario where they have theorized a route they must have taken if they took a car. I mean, I believe, are there any theories that does not involve Amy leaving in a vehicle with somebody from the Bay Village Square general area? In the first episode, I went over the theory that maybe someone got cold feet and Amy decided to walk back to the school to get her bike, and something happened beyond the Bay Village Square Shopping Center, not directly in the shopping center, but at the time there was also some kind of alleyway that someone could have parked a vehicle, or they could have gone around back through the bowling area. There's also a grocery store there that there was a supposed sighting. But how do we rectify this information? Was Mark Mihaljevic simply mistaken when he said the day of the disappearance someone called from the Euclid Square Mall? Did the perpetrator call from the Euclid Square Mall earlier in the week, and Mark Mihaljevic got that confused, and they did trace the call that they think, because would they know for certain that Amy picked up the phone call? Because her brother usually got home after she did, because her class let out before his grade. So most likely she spoke to this individual when nobody else was home. Again, I don't know if we know that for certain, but if they narrowed a window and they saw this phone call either on the, somehow traced it through the switchboard, because if it's technically not local, if it's from Euclid, then it would be logged and they would know where it came from. So was this Euclid call from the Euclid Mall payphone, was it the call that originally made this plan and started this ruse with Amy earlier in the week? And if they know that, then they have the exact date of the call as well. The police have not released that information. If they have certain suspects that they're looking at, wouldn't that be helpful to the public to know? And they could state that they suspect the call occurred at this time, even if they're not sure. It's not like they have to put out that information as if it's known fact, because how would they know for sure? I don't know how they would know for certain. Or is Mark Mihaljevic not mistaken? And someone did call the house, in which case did Amy or the kidnapper call the house from the Euclid Square Mall, either when Jason was home alone, or maybe he even spoke to Margaret, and for whatever reason, this information has never been allowed to be made public because law enforcement maybe believed it compromised the investigation in some manner. Was there even an attempted ransom, and then that all went haywire? And again, for whatever reason, they don't want that public. I mean, there's so much to go over here, so many conflicting reports, and of course, in missing persons cases, there are always sightings that end up not being the sightings of the individual, but how do you know for certain? Especially when law enforcement is so tight-lipped. So once again, always more questions than answers in a lot of these mysterious cold cases and strange disappearances. The Amy Mihaljevic case, of course, one of these cases where there's just such an overwhelming amount of information, and yet the case is unsolved. Obviously, we have plenty more to go over. We'll be going over other theories, local rumors, psychic information that's truly bizarre and could not have been known by the psychics that were not even from the area, that somehow knew the names of officers that had never been connected to the case before. So there's just a lot of bizarre information about this case. Plenty more to go over. Hope you guys found another edition of Mindshock True Crime informative and posing even more questions that need to be asked in order to solve these cases. You can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Help support the podcast. Help us get more mind-shocking episodes out there and continue to promote awareness in not only this cold case, but other cold cases. So like this podcast, share it across social media platforms, of which you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, code podcaster requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notifications, make sure you allow your device to have those notifications come through. You could also just go to youtube.com/Mindshock to see the latest podcasts as they are released, check out the lives, and also peruse our ever-expanding back catalog of cases and topics, all reviewed in typical Mindshock fashion with logic and reason at the forefront. Objective, neutral, scientific examination of all cases and topics. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.